So we're all here because climate change is at the forefront of our minds. And it's clear why when you look at its consequences. Wildfires, heat waves, drought, food shortages, melting ice caps, extreme weather events, and mass migration, just to name a few. I'm sure the first time you thought about climate change on this scale, it was overwhelming. You might even be feeling overwhelmed right now. And that's true for most people. The majority of Americans are really worried about climate change. And globally, most young adults feel helpless and powerless when they think about climate change. We'd hope that as the scale of climate change grows, so does the motivation to act. But these feelings of powerlessness often leave people too paralyzed to take action. One solution that behavioral scientists have provided is to take problems like climate change that are so overwhelming and downscale them to the individual. Focusing on an individual makes us feel compassion, which is like a big driver of getting us to act. And it makes us feel like our actions make an impact. And these are important feelings. These are the feelings that drive personal change, like donating or changing your lifestyle. But while those changes are necessary, they're not sufficient. We need complementary collective and civic action, like community activism and policies that regulate institutions to meaningfully address climate change on all levels. And when you focus on specific victims and perpetrators, you risk failing to bring awareness to the necessity of these issues. And you might see this and feel like, okay, the only other approach then is to give people the full brunt of the information, tell them everything that's going on. And of course, this highlights that we can't do this alone. It requires collective action. And it requires addressing these large-scale institutional actors that aren't on these individual stories. But it leaves us, once again, feeling powerless and unable to act. And these two approaches to talking about climate change are often pitted against one another. But with funding from RARE, I've begun early line of research that I'm going to share some initial results from. It's going to talk about how these two might not be that mutually exclusive. So I'm just going to walk through some of the steps of the study. So this was studied in two contexts. Wildfires and extreme winter storms. And for this study, we put participants into one of three groups. Those who were getting this story that focused on a specific individual who was a victim of this extreme weather event. A story that focused on the broad victims and the structural factors that lead to it, so how climate change is driving these. And finally, a combination of those two. And then we looked at the things that get people to act. Like, who do you think is responsible for this? Are you compassionate towards these victims? And do you think your actions and the actions of all of us together have an impact? So I'm going to walk through how these different narratives shape these motivators in the context of wildfires first. And so the takeaway from this graph design is that on the x-axis is what those outcomes look like for that narrative, and on the y-axis is the outcome itself. And so just to start with compassion, you can see that the red line, which is people who read about an individual victim, those people feel a lot of compassion for victims generally, compared to those who are only reading about this issue as a broad scope narrative. And this compassion holds up for those who are also getting both types of information. When it comes to perceptions of responsibility, getting that broad scope information makes you realize that these institutional actors like companies have a responsibility to address the issue. A responsibility that you're still aware of even when you get the narrative that combines both types of information. And interestingly, we are starting to see some unique benefits of combining these information. Like people who get both types start to realize that punishing just individuals in punitive ways like fines and sentences is probably not sufficient for addressing these issues. And I'm going to walk through these also in the context of winter storms. And the results are going to look fairly similar, so I want you to really focus on that purple line, which again is the combination of these two ways of framing climate change. And we see that these people feel a ton of compassion for victims. They feel like there's responsibility across the board, from these institutional actors like companies to other individuals to themselves. And they think that both individual action, like donations, and collective actions, like policy changes, are required to address these issues. And in this case, we also looked at behavior, specifically are people willing to make actual donations from their compensation towards these victims? And are they willing to take steps like contacting their House representative or advocating for climate regulation to address these issues? And sort of like as you would expect, people who read about a really compelling individual victim are going to donate a lot more than those who get just a broad scope of information. And from this, you can interpret this as a 60% increase in how much people are willing to donate for money that's otherwise their compensation for the task they've been doing. And we see that level, that huge jump in willingness to act, hold up for those who also get both types of information. And while it's only trending in this direction, there is suggestive evidence that it might be for those people who are getting both types of information, they're not just willing to act more on the individual level, but participate more in these collective actions, so showing more support for federal decarbonization policy. And in other contexts like public health, we've successfully shown that you need both of these things, a sense that I have an impact and that we together need to act to get people to support these collective level changes. So just to recap the results from this early work, people who learn about an individual victim in need, they feel a lot of compassion for victims generally, and they think that their actions have impact. People who learn about the broad scope and scale of an issue and what its root causes are, they develop a really strong awareness of the parties at play and who's responsible. And they recognize that collective level action, like policy shifts, are necessary to address these issues. But it's only through combining these sorts of information that you can get people to feel all these important motivators to action, which is necessary for addressing climate change at the individual and structural level. And just to recap with behavior, we see that people aren't just feeling these important feelings that get us to act, they're also taking action even in the really unique context of research study. They're willing to give money to people in need and donate to GoFundMes out of their compensation because they're being driven by these compelling narratives. And this is true for both people who learn just about an individual victim and people who get both kinds of information. And so moving forward, we're hoping to look at how to similarly translate the feeling that collective action is important and necessary into true participation in collective action. And this could look like shifting our narratives in a way that more streamlines the thought process from learning about the broad scope to feeling like you should take steps into enacting collective action. Or it might just be that for these narratives, the collective action that's necessary is things more akin to community activism, things that feel more together with others. Beyond this, we hope to expand this from just extreme weather events to things like waste, diet, and energy. Thank you.